G'day, Scotty from Xenium Real Wealth, and this is our July 2019 Q&A. It's our open and live Q&A session we do every month. It's in the fourth week of every month, and tonight is the July 2019 one. All right, so I'm going to kick off straight into it. We try and keep these things as short as we can at 30 minutes on the dot, so we don't hold you up any longer than we absolutely need to. So, first question, what do we got there, Jace? Right. What is a good step for beginners? We're talking about investing. Good step for beginners. All right. Well, the first good step is to make sure you can actually save money. So you've got to be able to save money to save up for a deposit, to be able to do whatever it is that you want to do with your investing dollars. The second step is, once you've got a savings plan that you're actually sticking to, is that you need to think about what type of property that you're looking to buy, and you start having that thought process. At the same time, you need to go and speak to a really good broker, and a broker is going to tell you, a finance broker that is, finance broker is going to tell you that yes, on this income that you've got, you can service this much debt, and so therefore you'll need this amount of deposit. Or they're going to say to you, look, you don't have anywhere near the deposit, or you need to get your income up, or you need to look at cheaper property. Whatever it is, that's the sort of thing that a good broker will do for you. So that is at the same time as you're thinking about your strategy. Once you know what it is that you can finance in terms of the amount, then you're going to have a good idea of how that fits into your strategy and where you're going to go. So that's the first steps for beginners. Once you have all that put to bed and you understand how much debt you can take on comfortably, what sort of deposit you need, and the strategy around where you're going to go and look, well, then you can start the looking process, but only after those steps are done in the beginning. All right. What's next, Jace? What is the minimum amount you should invest with? Well, we're talking about property investing. So the minimum amount should be 20% of the property value if we want to talk about being safe. So that figure is obviously going to vary. So if you've only saved up, $20,000, that means you can buy a $100,000 property plus costs and other bits and pieces, right? So that's a really, really broad kind of answer. The minimum amount you should invest with. I can understand what the person's asking here, in the sense of, is there an amount that's too little to spend and we're just going to get like a crap property? Well, I guess so. I guess that's an answer. If we're talking about specific properties, what you should be looking at doing is definitely at all times possible trying to put down 20% on that property. So if you have saved up $100,000 and you got some costs, well, then you're looking at between a $400,000 and a $500,000 property that you can buy. So work on a $400,000 plus costs. That's what needs to get put down with deposit and costs, and that's what you can do at 80%. Should you be buying $400,000 property? Well, that comes back to that first question on what's those good first steps. What's the broker said? How much can you afford? What's your serviceability? That sort of thing. The minimum amount you should invest with is the second part of my answer on that is always as little as possible, right? So yes, on one side, we want to not have lender's mortgage insurance and have a safety buffer in our investments. On the other side, I only want to use as little of my own cash as possible anytime I do anything. So that's the balance you've got to find. If you can find property for $280,000 in an okay area, that's a townhouse that's now 8 years old or something like that, then, and that fits your strategy, then, well, yeah, why would you not buy that? Just because you could spend $500,000, why wouldn't you go and spend $280,000? So that's that situation where you go, well, you always try and spend as little as possible. And even in the same style of property, we're looking at something around $300,000. There's something for $320,000, but I can get the other one down the road for $295,000. Well, you're going to spend less doing the $295,000 if it's comparable deals. So you're always going to try and shop for a bargain and cut your spending in that way as well. All right. There's another question here. Is there any way to invest with others if you only have a small amount or can't get a loan for a house, etc.? Yeah, there is. I mean, there's syndications and there's pooling and groups and mates and all that sort of stuff. So we have quite a few clients that buy property on their own, and we buy property for them. We've got clients that pool their money together and have bought properties, and we've got clients that pool their money together and do developments. So from smaller amounts, like say, you know, 40, 50, $80,000, etc., that they have pooled their money together and gone in being involved in developing together. And that's a very viable strategy as well. So yeah, you can definitely share the love and be involved with others, and do your property investing, I guess. Think outside of the norm. Don't have to just buy one property on your own. You can get in with others. Obviously, there's complications with joint ownership, but it all depends on the structure to begin with. And if that's set up correctly, then they can run very smoothly. What's next? How do you create leverage? Okay, so we're talking about leverage often from investment property. So leverage. Well, leverage is another word for debt, right? So how do we create a debt leverage? How do we create the ability to refinance on a property is what I'm trying to get from this question. If that's the question, good, I'll be able to answer it. If it's not, send me an update and I'll try and answer that one. All right, so leverage is going to come from when something has a value, and then we can finance against that. So what we're going to look at doing is one of two things. You can either buy a property, for example, now and sit it in the market and just wait and wait and wait. And then at some point when that property has captured the economic rent from inflation and land capturing through infrastructure and other gains, then that price has gone up and that property will increase in value. Then you can have a higher valuation and you can leverage off that and remove some of the equity as debt and go and do something else with it, preferably buy another property rather than buy a sports car. The other way to do that is to speed it up and to do something quicker. So you could buy a property that needs a renovation or extension and go and do that reno or extension and increase the value of that property, and then actually refinance and leverage and go and do that again as well. You could do a new construction. So buying land at the right price, say the duplex we talked about last week, something that has, you know, $80,000 to $100,000 in uplift in it over a 12-month period, you can go and do that, and you can potentially refinance at 12 months, or you can realize that and take the cash out and do that. So you're taking the cash out, that's not necessarily leveraging, but that is leveraging the project. You've used property or you've leveraged property to achieve a goal. The whole concept of buy and never sell is very flawed. Now, it's flawed because not every asset in the property market performs at the same rate all the time. So if you're not constantly monitoring your asset and your portfolio, then why would you it's a very lazy way of doing something. Why would you just let it sit there forever? You could go through a really good, say, 3 to 5 years and it does really well, and then the next 8 years it does nothing. Well, what if you had realized that at that 5-year mark, the future forecast for that area was looking, you know, ho-hum. So what's wrong with selling that property, realizing your gains, and then going into do it in another area that has got potential for growth? So that's how I would look at leveraging my activity in property, as well as you've got leveraging time. You can leverage your time in what you do by getting specialists in or other people that do things for you. So you could go to every bank and check their interest rate, or you could use a broker. And that's essentially creating a leverage of your time, because the broker will be able to do that for you and bring those answers back. Or you could go and look at all the properties in those areas that you want to buy and do your maths and do your sums and do your inspections. Or you could use a buyer's agent and do that same thing, and that's leveraging your time there. You could go and try and work out how to do development, or you could partner with an established team, and you leverage those expertise as that as theirs. That's that leverage. So that's how you can create leverage. All right, we've got another question. Buying and selling, is this following a property clock or cycle? Yes, maybe. That's a good question. I don't know if I particularly understand fully that question. If whoever's typing that question in could just expand on that a little bit, that'd be unreal. So essentially buying and selling, if we're talking about in terms of what we're actively doing, buying and selling, then yes, we're following a property cycle. So there's, hang on, do you follow a particular cycle for when to buy and when to sell? Yeah, absolutely we do. So we follow, there's an overall macro cycle, then we follow local cycles and those data updates that we talk about in week 2 of our program. And that's what we do every month. We discuss what's happening on with the market cycles and where we're going to buy and where you should possibly look at selling if you have property in that area. It's coming to a peak time, let's get out. So absolutely, the whole Xenium approach is very much focused on transacting, strategic transacting in property, and not just lazy buy and hold, and not trading. Okay, so we're not trading. We're not. You have that picture of trading where you're a stock market trader on the floor and you're yelling and you're throwing your ticket around, which is all computerized now, of course. But back in the old movies in the 80s and 90s, for those of us old enough to remember that, that sort of concept of a trader is essentially what happens in property. Slower, right? You don't transact necessarily or twice daily, but you can still try and flip. We've got guys called flippers out there. That flip properties and do bits and pieces. That's a very specific skill set, and that's not what we're talking about. And we're also not talking about the other one where we just buy something and then forget about it because in 25 years when you come to retire that you're going to go, oh, that property is now worth X. Oh, that's good. That did well. That's not what we're talking about either. We're very much in between there. We're talking about strategic transacting. So strategic transacting is where everything is every property is always bought on purpose and for a purpose. Okay, so on purpose in the sense of this is what's happening in the market cycles and this is what we're going to do right now and this is why we're doing it. For a purpose is this property is going to serve this purpose in my portfolio. So you've got to remember that, on purpose and for purpose. So that's really important because if you get those two things right, then every time you do a strategic transaction, you will know what it's doing, where you're doing it, and how long you're going to hold that property for. That might not be a fixed time frame, but it will have a set of parameters around it. For example, the duplex construction I mentioned before, that's a 12-month program. That's a 12-month purpose, right? So we get in, we do the construction, sell 12 months' time. Now that 12 months could be, it won't be less than 12 months due to CGT and other bits and pieces, but it could be 13, 14 months, whatever. But that's the plan, right? That's the plan. The plan is not a 25-year hold. Another way to do a plan is, well, we're going to buy this property at a discount right now. So we're in Sydney, the market's depressed, we're buying it. I don't have a time frame, a specific monthly time frame to resell that property or to refinance it, leverage, as the question was before. But you will have like a KPI. So when the market moves or gets back to levels of 2017, or when there's this number of transactions in the suburb I'm in, or when the median house price in that suburb goes to this, then I will look at assessing it. So you can go by KPIs. You don't have to go, but that still has a plan, right? It's not just a set and forget, buy and hold and do nothing with it for the rest of the days. So that is how we do it. So when we talk about things on the Xenium program, they're very much a strategic transaction, and we go in to a market on purpose, and that property transaction has a purpose attached to it. What's next? Would you buy a well-priced, off-the-plan beachfront lot despite it being part of a body corporate development? Okay, that's a good question. Okay, so well-priced, off-the-plan beachfront lot, even though it's part of a body corp. Okay, so body corporates, they're becoming more common on land. as the land size changes and as certain parameters and restrictions happen around development, there is call for a community management scheme or a body corporate to be put in place on some lots. Now, that can be anything from a really, really small fee each year, which is to maintain, say, the sewage pump out system or something like that. Or it could be a lot larger fee, more what you're accustomed to with, say, an apartment building, which, because that little land estate you've got has a community centre, a tennis court with a pool, or whatever it is there. And there's body corporate fees attached to that, and the maintenance of the streetscape as you go in or something like that. So anything from really, really small amounts up to larger amounts, that's becoming more common on land development now. So the question, that's the body corporate part. The question relates to, would I buy a well-priced off-the-plan beachfront lot even though it's got a body corporate development? Okay. So there's two parts to this question. You have to look at the fact of, would you buy a beachfront lot anyway? That's your decision. And the second part is, what makes it well priced? So is it well priced because it's part of a body corp? Is it well priced because the seller is a mortgagee in possession and they need to get out of the property and the bank is in possession of it or they're about to knock on the door? Is it well priced because it's the last block the developer's got? It was a block he was going to hold and now needs cash in 2 weeks to go and settle on his next site. What's the motivation behind it being well priced? You have to be able to answer that first. If it's simply well priced because it's part of a body corp, well, then you need to look at other land lots that are part of a body corp in other areas and see how they compare to ones that are not part of a body corp in terms of pricing. So if you can't do that on land and it's constructed homes, then you need to look at the same thing. So if there was a non-beachfront lot of land that was constructed and now they've all got houses on them, how do they compare to others in that same area with homes on that do and don't have body corps? And then you come back to your beachfront. What else is around the area that you can get? Is there another estate that doesn't have a body corp? How does that compare on price? And when you look at pricing, you can look at per square metre price. You can look at average pricing for blocks in that area. There's a few different ways you can do that. So there's a few ways that you can price on all that sort of stuff to see how you're going to come about that. So if that is how it is, if it's only cheap because it's a body corp, okay, then the answer is, well, what's that worth to you? Because whatever that discount is, let's work it out as a percentage. And I'm going to pull figures here because I don't have these figures. I don't even know anything about this block. But if the beachfront blocks in the area are normally $1 million, okay, and this is, say, 900,000 because it's part of a community management system or body corp, then we're looking at it like a 10% drop in value. So the question you've got to ask yourself is, okay, is that good? Let's think that after I put a house on that, or if you don't put a house in, just land banking, am I okay with that block always being perhaps 10% under market value? That's what we've got to ask. So if you're comfortable with that, if you're comfortable with the terms of the arrangement as you're buying that block, then that's going to be the same as what someone has to buy it from you, whether it's a block or a house or whatever the completed product is. That's what it will look like. So that's probably the only way I can sort of say, like, I don't know enough about the block, I don't know that, but that's how I would look at it. How does it compare to others in the area that do have body corps? How does it compare with others that don't have body corps? How does it compare with pricing in terms of percentage? Because whatever you're going in at, you're probably going to get out at the same time, like in future. So if those blocks then move to $2 million down the track, then you could expect that this block would be $1.8 million. That's what I'm trying to say. There'd be a 10% margin of error there. Sorry, margin of discount, because that's what you bought in at and that's what the market is accepting because it's in a body corp. All right, we've got some other questions here. Okay. I'm even getting them live on Facebook. It's pretty good. All right. With regards to last week's development opportunities, how does it work if I want to join in on that? Okay, so the development we talked about last week was a residential land subdivision of 7 lots, and they usually come in a couple of stages. The first stage in that is stage A, stage 1, which is before DA. So before the developer gets the DA, he gets a bunch of partners in and they do that. And then after DA, there's a stage 2 funding comes in. How does it work? Well, each development is slightly different and each developer works differently. But in general, our clients group together and they form an entity which loans the developer under a mortgage money to do the development. That's the short version, right? And there's a lot of different ways and subtleties around how that works, but that's essentially how that model works. So you as a participant in that don't need to go and get bank funding. The developer does that. You don't do any of the development. You're across the development. You get updates, but you don't. You're not hands-on, right? You're a development participant in the sense of a financial participant. You're not actually on the ground doing the work each day. So that's how that works. They're a very good way of going. We've had clients be quite successful in that, and they're always exciting to be a part of. I mean, it's a great way to get exposure to development without actually having to be a developer, and of course, having to learn all those skill sets from the beginning. You're actually making your money earn more money and your money work for you, rather than you swapping your time for a reward. You're swapping your money for a money reward. So it's a pretty smart way of doing it. If you want to know more about that, you can hit us up. All right, I got some questions here live on Facebook. This is amazing technology nowadays, hey? So is it better to have P&I repayments? This is for investment. Is it better to have principal and interest repayments or interest-only repayments? All right, it's a good question. Look, is it better? That's going to come down to personal opinion, I reckon. Personally, I love to see my debt levels going down. So I would always like to have a principal and interest repayment in there. The way that the banks are structuring some of their loans, sometimes it's not that different, because sometimes you actually get a better rate if it's a principal and interest repayment than you do if it's interest only. So when you actually just do an interest only, it's not as beneficial as it used to be just doing that. The thing to remember with interest only is you're not knocking off any of your debt, right? So you have that interest only loan for 5 years, a $400,000 loan. You get to the end of 5 years, you still got a $400,000 loan. So it's actually pretty depressing. So if you want to start knocking down, I think that's good. The way it works if it's interest only and you're really, really super disciplined is that if it's an investment property, you can take that amount of principal that you would otherwise be going to pay off the investment property and pay it off your own home. If you're super disciplined and you can do that, and then you're reducing your personal non-deductible debt, then absolutely do that. But for the other 99% of us in the room who perhaps forget in that transaction that things get lost and you just end up paying your normal monthly payment on your home loan, I think P&I is perhaps the smarter way to go if you're holding a property for a longer period of time. All right, would you recommend buying a hobby farm which produces additional income such as avocados, limes and mandarins? Asking for a mate. All right, that's awesome. Okay, hobby farms. Look, back in the 80s and 90s, hobby farms were really just another excuse for a tax write-off. So I don't know too many farmers that would consider farming as a hobby. It's very much a profession and it takes a whole lot of effort. Hobby farms would be really what you'd call a lifestyle property, right? So I think gone are the days where you can buy a parcel of land and have an avocado tree on it and then you can write off half your business income on maintaining that. I think that's probably a bit of a far-fetched dream nowadays. But in terms of lifestyle property, yeah, it's going to come down to what it is that you want to do. Are you living there? Is it just investment? because there's two very different things. If you're living in your lifestyle property and it happens to have some mandarin, lime, and avocado trees or whatever it is, and then that turns an income on the side of what you do for a living, well, then that's okay. That's your choice. I mean, it's no different to, selling lemonade out the front of a house in a suburban street, right? It's not that different. If, however, you're buying a farm, like a hobby farm, as an investment, you need to be very, very careful about why you're doing that, and is it actually going to turn a dollar? Because farming is very difficult. We've got clients that are farmers, and I get to see the joy in their faces when they talk about farming. It's not always there, and farming can sometimes be a great way to make a small fortune by starting with a large one. So there's things like that you need to be very careful of. If you're doing farming as a business or property as a business, well, then that's a very different type of financial discussion and uses different methodology in what you're doing. You really need to have some skill set in that area. And the whole concept of, buying a farm for fun probably is something that I'd say you need to go and get your head read. But other than that, if you're a farmer and you're experienced in that area and you know what you're doing, or you have contacts, or you're joining up with someone who's experienced in that area, then yeah, absolutely. There is money to be had in agriculture. There was stats that I read, because that's what you happen to do in my job, is read things. It was last year, and it was an annual report the Australian government put out. The majority of value in farms over the 10 or 15 year period prior to that report last year was from land value gain. It actually wasn't from farming. The majority of the wealth created was from the capturing of the land value in the land itself, rather than the actual farming activity. So you need to have some pretty deep pockets, know what you're doing, to consider taking on a hobby farm. We got any more questions, Jace? All right, what's some of my tips for selling a house? Oh, great. Okay. House selling tips. Well, firstly, make sure you get your pricing right. Okay. So you've got to make sure that's right. You've got to make sure that you're not just testing the market. You're never going to get a sale if, like, oh, look, the whole market's at 500, so I might get a wood duck. I'm going to put it on for 550. Okay, it's not going to happen. You're wasting everyone's time, and agents are too busy nowadays. They're just not going to bother entertaining that concept. So you're just going to waste your time. Secondly, is perhaps probably timing the market to a certain extent. We're all lemmings here in this country, and even though our winters are really not that cold, when spring comes around, there is a lot more activity with people out. So we got that high activity in spring. We've got high activity in early January after the Christmas holidays. So if you're not really set in a specific time, then you can go in those peak times, bearing in mind that a lot of other people put their property on at the same time as well. So it's always a good time to sell a well-priced property. It's always a good time to buy a well-priced property. Like, there is that balance there that comes from the well pricing. The third thing would be presentation of the property. So especially if it's your own home, perhaps, well, it depends how many kids you got and how many are at home, is how easy that is to keep it looking good. But definitely for your photos, make sure you get it either professionally photographed or even staged. If it's an investment property, so where you can go in and get photos done with furniture and other bits and pieces, it makes an absolute world of difference to how that is presented online. Because let's face it, we're all lazy, right? So you go through the real estate websites and you look at pricing, because you sort by pricing probably, and then you're going to look at photos. Oh, that looks nice, and a property can look better from a photo just because it has furniture in it. So that's some of my tips there. And the final one would be making sure you get the right agent for your property. Okay. So the right agent isn't your auntie just because she sells property, or isn't some bloke from your soccer club because he sells property. It might be them. The right agent is the agent who does the best in your area for that type of property. Now, agents can be generalists, but because of the way the markets are and because of people's expectations, a lot of them do have a tendency to specialize nowadays. So if you have an apartment to sell, there's not much point giving it to Ray White Rural, right? I mean, that's just stupid. So just because you know the guy who works at Rural doesn't mean that he's going to sell your apartment. Now, that's a really extreme example, but that's the same thing. Even in inner city, there are people that specialize in houses or commercial or apartments or townhouses or development sites or whatever it might be. And then so you want to work with that person who specializes in your type of property in your area. And then you want the one that does the best results. And you can look up that on sales data, time online, number of listings, all that sort of thing. The agent with the greatest number of listings doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best agent. You want the agent who has the best median price results with probably the least time on market, but the least amount of pricing change. Because it's very easy to turn over a property that's listed at 550 that you jump and you drop down at 480 and then it just goes out the door, when really the price was more like 510, 515, and that was the better price. So you've got to watch all that stuff as well. Is there a major slump coming for Sydney and Melbourne this year? Well, I think we've had a bit of a slump in Sydney and Melbourne to a certain extent. There's conflicting data coming out on Sydney at the moment, in the sense that has it bottomed? Is it on its way back up? It's sort of definitely sort of doing this. I can tell you for certain it's not at the peak. Is it at the bottom? I don't have that level of crystal ball that perhaps other people might think they have, but I can tell you it's not at the peak. Is it in for a major slump? I think that after the election and with the lending changes and other bits and pieces, I would probably go as far as to say we might have seen the worst of the quick drops happening. Doesn't mean we might not see a bit more of a slide, but I think it will start to level out on its downward run now. Whether it's at the bottom or not, as I said, I don't know, but I think we'll start to see the end of it coming towards the end of this year, which is actually what I said in February and got crucified for it. Melbourne is probably similar, it just doesn't have as high highs. And there's a lot of activity in northern Melbourne with rail and new estates and other bits and pieces. It's a bit more active. Okay, with regards to last week's development opportunities, how does it work if I want to join in on that? All right, I think pretty sure I've answered that one. Don't know why that's a repeat. But yeah, if you want to know more about development, you can hit us up in the text box, or contact the Xenium office and we'll be able to talk to you about that. Look, I'm pretty a stickler for keeping this at the 30 minutes. So I'm just checking the Facebook page, making sure there's nothing else on there. There isn't. There doesn't look like there's any more questions here. So look, thank you very much. This is the Xenium Real Wealth July 2019 Q&A session. We do it live every month in the fourth week of every month on a Thursday night. So if I didn't get to answer your question tonight, hit us up. We'll try and do it direct, or we'll save it for next month and make you wait 4 weeks. How about that? Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I'm Scotty from Xenium Real Wealth. Our program is free to join. Jump on the link that's in the sidebar or attached to this video, however you got it. Join up and you'll get notifications of all these webinars coming up and all the other things that we do in Xenium. Thank you very much and have a great day.